Very good morning, guys. Today we'll continue with again the module 3. It is kind of a very lengthy module, but it's actually the topics are easy. It's only thing is there are too many topics for you guys to study and remember. Okay, so till last week we covered the external communication interface. Uh, and particularly we saw about some of the wired interfaces. So these are the communication interface from one system to the other system or to the outside world. Okay, so now in this lecture, particularly today, we will see the external wireless communication interfaces. Okay, you guys can hear me, right? Hello.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so first topic is the infrared. Okay, so you guys must have heard of this, and we're using this on a daily basis. Infrared based communication. So it's basically a serial, half duplex, and line of sight based wireless technology. So it's a serial communication, and it's half duplex, meaning like at a time only one person can transmit or either receive the data, but not both. And the other one is it's line of sight. Okay, so meaning you have to there has to be like a line of sight between the two devices for it to communicate. uh, Now, a typical example is your remote controls of your TV, DVD player, AC, and whatnot, right? So, any remote controller will fall under this category. So, as you can see in the image on the right, so you see a regular TV remote, and now you also have some additional extension devices, something like IR blasters that you can connect to your mobile phone, and through which you can control all the gadgets in your house using some apps. So you have these infrared blasters available now. So typically, the infrared communication allows point to point or point to multi point. Okay, and also as mentioned, it the devices are all expected to be in line of sight. Okay, the communication range is very small. It's like 10 centimeter to 1 meter, making it good to use indoors. But again, early remote unlocking of cars operated using IR communication. But these days it's switched to the radio frequencies. But now, I mean, but earlier it used to be IR, and the data range of this is 9600 bits per second to 16 Mbps. Okay, it's fairly decent. And the most important point of your infrared communication is its cost. It's very cost effective. It's cheap to buy. Okay, so the image on the bottom right here, this is a typical IRDA transceiver. Okay, as the name suggests, transceiver. So it's a transmitter and a receiver in one device. And you can see two leads going. So there are two uh, what to say, two diodes here. We will see what is that the next slide. So the infrared communication is categorized into several things. So one is it could be like a serial IR. So depending on, so only based on how much uh, bandwidth it supports, right? It's classified into serial IR, which is kind of very slow, and then medium IR, and then you have fast IRs going to up to 4 Mbps, and then very fast IRs up to 16 Mbps, and ultra fast IRs 100 Mbps. So whatever we use at home comes mainly under like either serial or medium IR. So other things are not used at home, so maybe it will be used in the industry. So the communication of this, right? So as we saw in the earlier slide in the figure, there are two diodes, right? So one is a transmitter and the other one is a receiver. Okay, so the transmitter is actually an LED, okay, where your electrical energy is converted into light, and the receiver is just the opposite of it. It's a photodiode where the light is converted to electricity. Okay, so and then how it works is, if the device you're using is a transceiver, then both these transmitter and receiver will be on one device, and the transmitter transmits the infrared light, and it actually bounces back from the object of interest, and it gets received by the receiver. Okay, so the communication can either be unidirectional or bidirectional. Unidirectional examples are TV remotes where a transmitter is transmitter transmits, and then there is a receiver. So there's only one way of communication. But bidirectional is the there is also the object that's of interest that will also have the transmitter and a receiver. Okay, so you use these transceivers for both sending as well as receiving the signals. Now, an interesting point is, like, so the light bounces back, right? You must have observed this, like, in many a times, right? If you had played with your TV remotes, I still remember I used to play. I mean, me and my brother, we used to play with the TV remote. So we'll be sitting inside one of the rooms of the house. That the TV will be in the living room. So we actually place some mirrors, and then we used to operate the remote, and then we used to find the line of sight, right? Like with bouncing back, with reflection, we used to change the remote channels, and that would work. Okay, so that's something very interesting about this IR. So it supports line of sight. At the same time, it works based on principle of a reflection, right? So you bounce back the light, and then you can channel it to particular receiver or transmitter device. And coming to the communication part, like how communication is divided. So here there are two parts to it. So one is a physical link part, and there is a protocol part. The physical transmission is what we saw just now. So it just based on light transmission, infrared light transmission to be particular. And the protocol part, it has three layers. So one is the physical layer, and there's a MAC layer, and there is a logical link control layer. So so media access control and logical link control together is kind of like a data link layer, where you do the flow control, and also the multiplexing of the signals. Those things takes place. So for more information, you can always log into irda.org. So they fix the standard for infrared communication. For example, like all these terminologies and where the ranges fit in, right? So these are all fixed by the IRDA. Any questions on this? Okay, if not, we'll move to the next topic. So next one, we'll see Bluetooth. Bluetooth is a very popular wireless protocol. So it's a low cost, low power, short range wireless technology, mainly used for data and voice communication. Although you can actually use Bluetooth for sharing any kind of file and media, right? So it's the kind of the favorite choice for short range communication. I think we all know we use smartphones, and then we even go to an extent of sharing movies, right? So you guys must be aware of the Bluetooth technology and its applications. So you can share from sharing your ringtones all the way to pictures and media. We can do many wonders with Bluetooth within a very short range. So this was first proposed by Ericsson, 1994, although it has gotten popular in the 2000s. Um, and the properties of Bluetooth, it operates at 2.4 gigahertz radio frequency. Okay, along with frequency hopping spread spectrum, it's actually it's kind of like it falls under the what to say, the spread spectrum of even the Wi-Fi range. The data rate is up to 1 Mbps. It's not too bad. It's actually a decent data rate, and the range is 30 feet. And yeah, I think we can always relate to Bluetooth, right? Now, similar to IRDA, it's getting high. So it has a physical protocol part, and it's physical and protocol part. So the two things that we saw, right? And then it's also point to point or point to multi point. So here I just want to point one thing here. So as you can see, there is one master. And then there are multiple slave devices that connects to this master. And when you have more than one slave connected to a master, then you form a network. So otherwise, it becomes like a point to point communication. When you have more than one slave, it becomes a network, and this network is called as a piconet. And you can have multiple piconets in a range. Okay, so for example, if you take this particular slave, this camera is connected to more than one master. Okay, so everything is possible. I think we can as I said, we can relate to how the Bluetooth works. Put this somewhere here. I can put it here. Okay, so the next one, again, coming to the details of Bluetooth, we have this, the physical link is RF waves, the radio frequency waves we saw. And then we also saw the transmission and reception, that it will follow a packet-based data transfer. Okay, and the rules are again governed by Bluetooth protocol stack. Okay, and each device has a 48-bit unique ID. It can be identified as either master or a slave. Both the devices will have ID. And then, as we saw earlier, a piconet is formed when more than one slave connects to master, and any master can support up to 7 slaves. And there are a couple of few things here. So it's called, one thing is generic access profile. So it defines the requirement for detecting a Bluetooth. So this defines how we establish a connection. So these are the standards that are defined. Okay, and then once you establish a connection, you have the serial port profile, where the serial data communication happens. And there's also this file transfer protocol, FTP, where it defines the how we transfer the files. And the other one is human interface device. So these are the keyboards, mouse, or the AirPods we connect to, right? So how those get connected and interface. So these are the different protocols that are used for establishing the connection and transferring the data media. Again, for more information, we have this Bluetooth special interest group, and again, the bluetooth.org website, where they define the standard for this. Any questions on this? So these are quite straightforward. Okay, uh, it's just scratching the surface of all these different protocols. The next one we will see Wi-Fi. I think this is next to, not next to Bluetooth. Like one step ahead of Bluetooth. This is everyone's favorite. We can't live without it. It's like oxygen for us, right? So Wi-Fi. Wi-Fi is wireless fidelity. I think it's one of the most popular wireless communication interfaces, right? And it supports Internet Protocol, and it follows this 802.11 IEEE 802.11 protocol. These devices are identified by unique IDs. Okay, and that's called as IP address. I think we are all aware of what an IP address is. Okay, these are within a network. These the devices get a unique ID, and it can change. It can either be static or dynamic. It depends on how the implementation. But nonetheless, in a given network, the IP addresses are unique. And then you also have intermediate agent. So there is one intermediate agent that it's called as a router or an access point that is responsible for controlling the entire network. Okay, so if you see in this particular diagram, this figure, so we have this wireless router, and we of course we have seen all this, right? So now this is how typically the Wi-Fi works. So you have this internet out there, and then you have the ISP, internet service provider, provide you the connection that comes into the cable modem. And from the cable modem you source the line into the wireless router, and the router is the one, it broadcasts the Wi-Fi in a given range, correct? And then any device in that range can detect this Wi-Fi, and then it can connect to it. So, right. Again, we can relate to this because we do this on a almost like a daily basis. So the router is responsible for restricting access to the network, assigning the IP, routing data packets, all these things, and then it contains a wireless adapter, and the transmission and reception happens through the antenna. And of course, we know the antenna in the router. And the hardware part is also called as Wi-Fi radio. Okay, so the router that we call, right? So the hardware part is called as the radio part of it. Okay. It operates at 2.4 gigahertz or 5 gigahertz. So here we see, I mean, we spoke about antenna, right? So here we see an extreme version of it. So normally we see one or two, but then there are also people who badly need the signal, so they have multiple antennas. So here is a picture of 2.4 or 5 gigahertz, 6 Gbps router. So yeah. Uh, So the good thing is, as we saw in Bluetooth, right? So Bluetooth also operates in 2.4 gigahertz range, and so both Bluetooth and Wi-Fi they can coexist. The way the protocols have been defined, they can coexist, and mainly with Wi-Fi, Wi-Fi can coexist with Bluetooth and other ISM band devices. Okay. And then the communication, as we saw, the device when it's turned on, the particular device when it wants to connect to the router, so the router becomes kind of a master here. And the device when it's turned on, it searches for the available networks. We know this, and then we see if you want to connect, and then once the service set identifiers, SSIDs, right, are identified, then you can connect to it. And there are also security, like you can't connect to all the networks. You need there are some security layers. The security is defined by wireless equivalency privacy, like WEP and WPA is wireless protected access, right? So again, this is nothing but the passwords that we are asked, right? And there are also like ways to connect to the router itself. So you can connect to the router itself and try to change the settings. So these protocols define how to do that. The data range is 1 mbps to 150 mbps. It depends on what standard we are using, right? It's 802.11 a, b, g, and different versions are available. And also like what kind of modulation, which in particular version, what modulation method is used. And so the range, depending on it, whether it's used indoor or outdoor, the range differs from 100 to 300 feet. It's fairly reasonable. So especially even in shops, right? So we see the Wi-Fi routers doing a good job there. So we always take it for granted in any indoor space. We take it for granted there is Wi-Fi, right? So it's actually fairly a very robust protocol. Any questions, guys, on this? All right. Okay, next we come to Zigbee. I'm not sure if how many of you have heard of Zigbee, but again, Zigbee is again it's actually a very a popular protocol when it comes to Internet of Things. Zigbee is a low power, low cost wireless communication protocol, and it's based on 802.15.4 2006 standard. Okay, so you can imagine Zigbee to be like a low power version of Bluetooth. Okay, so we have this Bluetooth, and earlier we saw the infrared, right? Infrared is very naive. It only it acts like maximum it can do is like doing some remote control job, right? So you can push some button and you can specify what button is being pushed. It's like a TV remote. So now, on the other hand, Bluetooth allows you to transfer media and other things like little on the higher side, right? So Zigbee falls in between. Zigbee tries to do what Bluetooth is doing, okay, but at the power of an infrared device. Okay, so it tries to match. So it's on the lower and it's a very power efficient protocol. So that's why it has become popular in the Internet of Things world. Okay, so it's targeted for low power and low data rate and secure applications for WPAN. It also provides security because it's now so it has the best of both the infrared as well as the Bluetooth part. And the protocol supports a robust mesh network. A mesh network is nothing but all the devices are connected, there's a uh, the devices are densely connected, so we'll see how they are connected in a bit. And so since there are, so mesh typically means every device is connected to every other device. Okay, so with this kind of setup, it's easy for you to do the routing, right? I think in the hackathon also we saw when one of the nodes is not, we are not able to use it, we have to find an alternate path, right? So you need this fault tolerant mechanisms. So because you have a mesh network, when you have many routes between 2 points, then even if one of the route fails, you can choose the other one. Okay, so that's why Zigbee is very robust. Again, this operates at 2.400 to 2.484 gigahertz. It operates in three spectrum. So this range and a lower range 900 to 928 megahertz, and also one more range 868 to 868.6 megahertz. So these are unlicensed bands, which means nobody is using it. Anybody can use this range. Okay, so it makes it better because you can have these unlicensed bands and not interfere it with the other licensed bands of service providers. And and this is typically useful when you want to establish the connection inside a home, right? You don't want every home owner to pay for a license for using the band, right? So it operates in this range. And as you can see in the figure on the right, so Zigbee it can be made what to say, Zigbee can be used, applied to all uh, the smart home appliances. So your smart TVs or ACs, any device you want to make it smart, and you want to make it communicate to your the gateway. Zigbee is very much suited for that. The range is 100 meters and data rate of 20 to 2250 kbps, which is fairly reasonable. It's as we said, it's not too high. You can't transfer movies in this, but then it does its job well. So you see the diagram here. So this is how the network of Zigbee looks like. So it mainly has three types of nodes. The first one is the Zigbee network coordinator or Zigbee coordinator. Okay. So the Zigbee coordinator acts as the master. So it is responsible for initiating the Zigbee network. Okay. And so it stores all the network configuration information too. Okay, and we have Zigbee routers. Now these routers are nothing but intermediate points that connect to Zigbee devices, and Zigbee devices are the end devices. Okay, so typically you have a master, and then you have multiple Zigbee devices, and in between you have Zigbee routers. So these Zigbee devices, end devices, can connect to either a Zigbee router or to the Zigbee control coordinator directly. Okay, but it cannot connect directly to another Zigbee device. Okay, the ZED, right, the Zigbee end device cannot connect to another Zigbee end device directly. It has to go through either a router or through the coordinator. So that's the only way it is possible. So this actually is good because there is one centralized person who is aware of what the entire network is, and it's well suited for your home automation, right, or home or industry automation. So that's the idea about this network model. And as you can see, so we're just listing out all the areas where Zigbee is applied. It's home, industrial automation, energy management, home control, security, medical or patient tracking, logistics, and the list is just too big, right? So any single thing, like as I said, when in the Internet of Things era, right? So when you have multiple devices that has to be coordinated and in an automated fashion, Zigbee is the way. Any questions so far? Okay. Next, we come to General Packet Radio Service, the GPRS. Okay, so GPRS, what is GPRS? GPRS is a communication technique used for transferring data over mobile communication network like GSMs. Okay, so GPRS by itself may not be very familiar to you, but then if I say the GSM or the GSM modem, right, so that's there in your cell phone, your 2G 3G, all these connections, so those connections are based on this GPRS. Okay, so the GSM and all these protocols, right, so they're all like they depend on this GPRS mechanism. Okay, so so here is like an example device. So GSM GPRS quad band modem. So you need to insert the SIM here, and then you can use it. So this is nothing but so the way you connect to the cellular networks. So far we have seen some the Bluetooth, right? The Bluetooth, or like it's more like a personal network, personal area network, right? And then you also have, we saw the Wi-Fi, where it connects to the internet, and then the Wi-Fi is supports multiple devices in a great range, and it goes through the goes to the, connects to the internet in the wireless radio frequency range. And next we have this cellular networks. So these are the other aspects of it. Okay, so you can connect to the internet via the cellular network range. And how is it connected? It's connected, it uses this GPRS to do that. Okay, so you can, this is here, this figure shows you how the interfacing works between GPRS module and Raspberry Pi. So you can connect this module to Raspberry Pi, and Raspberry Pi can now connect to the cellular network. The data, as we saw here, right, it's packet based, is sent as packets. So the transmitter, it splits the data into several packets, and the receiver reconstructs the data by combining all the packets. Okay, so this we've already seen is part, it's kind of it sticks to the OSI layer, right? So the GPRS, as we see here, this diagram, right? Like you have the internet, and then you have the base stations, the GPRS network base stations, and then from the base station you get to connect your device. Your device, it searches for the signal, and then once the base station signal, you see the bars in your phone, right? 2G or 3G or whatever bars you have. Once you get the signal, you can connect to it. So again, we can relate to this how we are using the data uh, in the cell phone network, right? The data rate is theoretical maximum 171.2 kbps, and then the radio channel is concurrently shared between several users instead of a dedicated radio channel. So as we know that multiple people can share the same channel. So there are eight time slots, and the transmission is available in this over this all the available channels. And GPRS works along with IP, point to point, and X25 protocols. It's mainly used by mobile and embedded devices, which must have GPRS hardware. Okay, and then there must be a GPRS modem and a GPRS radio. Okay, and these are the hardware aspects of it. And in addition to this, you should also have a carrier. Okay, you need to have the carrier, right? From the base station you need to have the carrier signal to do the communication. So these are the essential things for you to have a GPRS communication. So you might wonder, the data rate is too small. Yes, it is very small, but this is not what we use in present day, right? Like 3G or 4G, we don't use this. So GPRS is it's actually an old technology, and it's currently it's replaced by more the latest edge and high speed downlink packet access, HSDPA. Okay, so they offer higher bandwidths. GPRS is still in use by very smaller embedded devices, handheld embedded devices. Any questions in this? Okay. So with this, we come to the end of the wireless communication interface. Okay. Uh, so next we'll move on to embedded firmware. So far, what we have seen is in this module, we've seen the core of an embedded system, which is your processor. You can have different types of processors, like your microprocessors, or it could be FPGAs, ASICs, right? So there are different types of processors that we can, or the core units that we can use. The next part we saw was the memory, how memory, different types of memories are, and different techniques to store the memory, volatile, non-volatile, static, dynamic, and things like RAM, ROM, and all these things, right? And next we saw all the sensors and actuators. A sensor is a device that senses the physical dimensions, inputs into electrical signals. For example, you can convert temperature into a corresponding electrical signal, right? So a sensor acts like that way. It's more like a transducer. And actuator is the opposite of it. So it converts the electrical signal into a mechanical or electromechanical uh, action, energy. Then we saw input and output devices. There are different input and output devices, LEDs or keyboards, and different things, right? Microphones, speakers, and all these things are there. Optocouplers, relays, many things. Motor, stepper motor, very importantly, the stepper motor, and many other things. And later we moved on to the communication protocol. So in the communication protocol, we saw the onboard communication, how onboard the serial and parallel communication, how they take place within the system. One block in a system communicates to the other block in the same system. And later we saw on external communication. The external communication is like one system communicating to other systems, right? So in that, it involves both wired and wireless. So in wired we saw some protocols, and in wireless we saw a few. Now the next part of this, and it's, the final part of the embedded system, is the embedded firmware. So we saw the cores and also the other hardware components, all the devices, and we move on to the software side of it. So embedded systems use something called as a firmware. Okay, so it's embedded firmware. As we saw in beginning of this module, firmware is kind of it's a software, but then it is not as easily modified as a software would be. So theoretically it is possible, but practically we won't change it. Again, the example that I had given the other day was the lift, right? So in a lift, we have a firmware placed there. So there is a software in the lift that enables the lift to operate, but we don't see that software being changed too often, right? So that's why it's called as a firmware. So now this firmware, they are nothing but the control algorithms or program instructions, and they have the configuration settings for the program, for the embedded device to work. Okay, and these are inevitable part of embedded system. They are almost every embedded system has a firmware attached to it. It just doesn't matter what's the scale of the device, but at some level there is going to be at least like a one small ROM that is going to give you the configuration, and then it's going to have like a small firmware component to it. There are two methods to develop firmware. So one is you write a program in high level language like embedded C or C++. You use some kind of an IDE. An example of IDE is your Kale Microvision 3, right? So you use that particular IDE, and you direct that to particular microcontroller or a processor 8051 or C51 or anything, right? So you choose the target platform, and then you compile it. Okay, you actually typically it's called as a cross compilation, because you don't compile it for your own laptop. See, for example, if you're taking Kale and you're writing embedded C on your laptop may run on Intel or AMD processor, but when you compile it, you don't compile it for Intel or AMD processor, but rather you compile it for the ARM device, right? So it's called as a cross compilation. You do a cross compilation and you do a linking, and all these things happens. And this is the most easiest way to do it, especially for beginners. So you can write a simple C program, embedded C program, and then rest of it the IDE takes care, the tool takes care of other things. The other method is slightly more involved in getting the hands dirty. You write assembly code specific for the target processor. For this you need knowledge of the target processor. Okay, and as we saw, depending on which family of processors we are looking at, the code is going to change even in ARM, right? So ARM has so many flavors of their processor or controllers. So for each of these you may have to modify the code a little bit. Then we have something called as a hex file creation. So once you do the coding part, right, either in assembly or the embedded C or C++, it has to be compiled, right? So once it is compiled, and we call it binary, isn't it? So we call binary in our or the exe or dot out files in our desktops. The equivalent of that we can say is the hex file. Hex file is the final machine readable binary code. Okay, so and it's called as a hex file because the data, I mean the compiled code, it's represented in hexadecimals for the user to read. So that's why it's called a hex file. But in other words, it is still a binary file. And it has the machine readable code. So the IDE automatically converts the code. So when you do the cross compilation, it produces the hex file. But if you follow method 2, then you have to know which processor or controller you're going to use, and you have to create your hex file on your own based on the target processor or controller. As we can see, the method one using IDE is much easier because many of the things are taken care. It's a high level language. And portability is supported, and most of the other things are taken care by the IDE. Method 2 is tedious and time consuming, but it does provide a lot of flexibility. Developer needs to know about the instruction, and they need to refer the manual. So the manuals are really big. Okay, only if you are an expert, you can go with method 2. And then the two types of control algorithms. So this is something interesting. So there are two ways the embedded systems work. Okay, one is you whatever things you do, right, you put it in a while loop. Okay, so you have a set of things to be done. Let us say you have a thermal control system developed. So what you do is you have to sense a temperature. Okay, and then check whether the temperature is more or less than the threshold. Then take the necessary action, send the action out. And then do you stop? You don't stop, right? You have to repeat the entire process. So you put that code in a while loop. Okay, so you keep doing the same thing over and over. And you can put a timer also inside, so that you don't do it in a very fast way. So you have a timer that runs for like every single minute. You will wait, you'll run the timer for a minute, and then once the timer expires, then you will repeat these three steps. Okay, and then you go back to the while loop. So this just goes on forever. So that's called as the infinite loop or super loop concept. Now the other one is when you have tasks, This is for much higher embedded system, like a high level embedded or more complex embedded systems, where you have an operating system. It can be a general purpose operating system or a real time operating system. Okay, so based on that, you actually categorize this into tasks, and you have a task scheduler. I hope you have gone through that in your operating systems course. So you have an operating system, and then the tasks are scheduled. So that's the other way, but these are only for the high end embedded system. Most part of it you only use this infinite loop mechanism. So that brings us to the end of this particular topic. There's only one more topic left, the other devices. There are a couple of more circuits that we will see in that. Okay. But for today, we are done with this. So today we covered the external wireless mode of communication and the embedded firmware. Any questions, guys? Any questions, guys?
No, sir.
Was it clear?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So as I said, this particular module is exhaustive. Okay, it's a very big module, but again, uh, it's an easy module though, but you have too many things to remember. Okay, so I would say don't skip this module. You study this module because it's very easy. It's like you're just touching scratching the surface of it. Okay. And regarding the notes, right, so we are preparing the notes. The only thing is we only have like a scanned copy of your book, so we are trying to uh, uh, prepare notes from that. Okay, so soon you will get the notes. So all right, so if there are no more questions, I'll actually stop presenting. One second. All right, stop recording.